Hello, and welcome to today's Ask the Experts virtual session on preventing childhood obesity. My name is Alicia Smith. I'm the Director of Chronic Disease Prevention at ASTHO. The purpose of today's Ask the Experts virtual session is to highlight the intersection of research, policy, and practice of public health programs that prevent childhood obesity. This platform is an opportunity to invite an engaging discussion among the panelists from different disciplines at the local, state, and national levels. We hope that you will benefit from the panelists' different areas of expertise and perspectives. I am honored to welcome to you this virtual session on behalf of the CDC and to be joined by Suzanne Hurley, the Dissemination Team Lead at the CDC for the Prevention Research Centers Program. Suzanne, I'll turn it over to you to say hello.
Thank you, Alicia. This virtual event is the first of a three-part series highlighting research and tools developed by PRCs and the intersection of research and practice. The PRCs are a great resource for state health agencies across a variety of topics, including childhood obesity prevention. FYI, the next two virtual sessions will focus on mental and rural health, so stay tuned for announcements for those. Alicia?
Great, thank you. The Prevention Research Centers program consists of 26 public health universities or schools of medicine that conduct community-engaged research. Each PRC designs, evaluates, and implements health promotion and disease prevention programs that reduce health disparities. Today, we will highlight childhood obesity research developed by the Yale Griffin Prevention Research Center and the West Virginia Prevention Research Center. As will be featured during the webinar today, the Prevention Research Centers engage community stakeholders, state and educational agencies in the implementation of programs. In addition, the Prevention Research Centers also offer technical assistance to public health agencies through policy evaluation and program development. The goals for today's discussion is to help facilitate an engaging discussion between public health professionals and childhood obesity experts. We will also hope for you all to gain a better understanding of the continuum of research to policy to practice. We will also discuss best practices for developing multi-component interventions, and then learn some best practices from developing partnerships with the Prevention Research Centers, community stakeholders, educational systems, as well as non-traditional partners. Before we get started, I would like to have an opportunity to provide an overview of the logistics for this afternoon's webinar. Please log into both the Adobe platform using the link provided and also call into the number indicated in your confirmation email. This webinar is currently being recorded, and a link to the recording and webinar slides will be sent to you all via email. We invite you to participate by typing your questions into the on-screen chat box at any time throughout the virtual event today. If you are having any technical difficulties, please let us know through the chat box. We would like to take a few minutes for each presenter to briefly introduce themselves and describe their area of expertise and current work that's related to childhood obesity. So I will first start with Dr. Leslie Cottrell. Will you please introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Leslie Cottrell, and I'm from West Virginia University Prevention Research Center. I'm a developmental psychologist by training, and I get a chance to conduct obesity and childhood and adolescent risk outcomes research at the university through the PRC. On the screen, you'll be able to see my affiliations, and with that, I get the opportunity to work both within the Health Sciences Center and on our downtown campus. So I bridge psychology, public health, and medicine, which is a really nice mixture. I've enjoyed that, particularly as we start talking about different ways to address childhood obesity with families and in the community. So it's wonderful to meet everyone.
Thank you. Dr. Gupta, will you please introduce yourself?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rahul Gupta. I'm the Commissioner and State Health Officer for the Bureau of Public Health at the West Virginia Department of Health and Human Resources. Additionally, I'm also an adjunct professor of the School of Public Health at West Virginia University, and adjunct associate professor at the University of Charleston School of Pharmacy. I'm going to very quickly talk about a couple of things in my introduction that I think we can hopefully have an opportunity to discuss further. One of the things we're doing is something called the Keys for Healthy Kids, a program that we've started back in 2009, and we can go over some of these slides as we discuss later on as how we're having program, systems, and environment changes. And of course, the other talk I'm going to also discuss today is the Childhood Obesity Intervention Cost Effectiveness study that we have partnered with the Chan-Harvard School of Public Health, and finally talk about not just how these models work, but how to put these policies and interventions into the lives of everyday folks. So those are some of the things that, amongst others, that we're going to talk about, and I'm very excited to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you. It looks like we have some exciting conversations to come. Dr. Sewell, will you please introduce yourself?
It looks like Dr. Katz's slides are up next.
It does look that way.
So yes, Dr. Katz, please introduce yourself.
Okay. Otherwise, I can introduce Dr. Sliwa, and we can go back and forth. Thank you, Alicia. And I don't know whether I'm showing a few slides now. I assume I'm doing that later, so I'll just say a quick hello now. I direct the Yale University Prevention Research Center at Griffin Hospital. Have been privileged to do that since its inception in 1998, so it's a 20-year run at this point. Did you want me to go through my slides now quickly? Alicia, is that preferable?
Sure, yeah, and it looks like we've got some help on the ASTHO side to help move the slides along for you.
Okay, all right. So it's a little more than just saying hello. I'm certainly happy to do that. So just quickly about me, I was trained initially in internal medicine and then recognized that an awful lot of people in hospitals had stuff they never needed to get, and went on to a second residency in preventive medicine, which I completed at Yale in 1993, the very year, as fate would have it, that McGinnis and Fege published their famous Actual Causes of Death paper in JAMA. And the rest is history. I've sort of been focused on translating what we know into what we do ever since. At the Prevention Research Center, obviously our focus is community-based participatory research and translating knowledge into power. We've been particularly interested in portals. And we actually characterize the issue of portals as opposed to settings in a paper in the American Journal of Public Health about the multi-site translational community trial. And the idea that we really need ways of reaching communities. And one of the premier ways of reaching everybody in the community is via public schools, where everybody sends their children. So we've had a preferential focus on school-based programming, nutrition, physical activity. We've done smoking cessation, all the biggies. And the idea really is that we can expand out from a school-based focus to reach the whole community. We've had an interest in faith-based communities, work sites for the same reasons. The slide you're looking at obviously shows a levee, and with Alicia's kind invitation, just to quickly go through a few slides now to characterize what we're about. So this is the metaphor that's guided our work at the Prevention Center all these years. I think we could all be very frustrated that we're up against a flood of overwhelming forces that are obesogenic and morbidogenic, and it may feel like we're relatively helpless in terms of turning those toxic tides. And perhaps we are if each of us feels obligated to do it alone. But if we think that what stops a flood tide is a levee and that all any of us needs to do is to stack a sandbag, it's rather empowering. We can be part of the solution rather than abdicating and be part of the problem. We've thought about it this way. The other advantage is it's rather overwhelming to think you need to solve the whole problem on your own, or that a school is going to, or that a work site is going to. So we've asked our partners, are you willing to stack a sandbag on your real estate? Can we work together to do that? And if we can engage others, maybe we can build the whole levee. So Alicia, if you would advance the slides, please. I'm going to show them now. And frankly, this concept of building a levee is very much in line with the recommendations of the IOM when it comes to obesity prevention in adults and children alike. I mean, effectively, the IOM and now the NAM said, everything's broken, fix it all. So don't expect any one setting to be the solution. Fix everything everywhere, and do it one program or practice at a time. Next slide, please. So essentially that's what we've been trying to do. Our current demonstration project is called CHOOSE, Community Health Opportunities Organized with Schools at the Epicenter. We worked with an enlightened partner, really, in Independence, Missouri. We're in Connecticut, but we were approached by a superintendent of the Independence, Missouri School District 15 years ago who said, I really want state-of-the-art programming. So we were really privileged to have fertile ground far away from home as a proving ground for our implementation practices. We developed, tested, validated programming there, published it. And after a decade of working very constructively with a school district that invited us in, we have been working to transplant all of that back to 5 school districts here in Connecticut, and that is the CHOOSE project. And the idea is that we can reach the kids in schools and then add concentric layers. If we can reach the kids, we can reach the teachers. So we're doing adult wellness as well. If we can reach kids and teachers, we can reach parents. If we can reach parents, maybe we can start having conversations about complementary worksite programming. Maybe we can engage the faith-based community. Certainly we should be able to engage pediatricians and family practitioners. So what we've put together is a multi-tiered intervention with the idea that we can compare each tier and the magnitude of its effects to each other tier. Now that all sounds very good, but for the fact that it's really hard to get wellness programming to stick in schools because they're busy doing reading, writing, arithmetic, and just trying to make it through the day. So we'll obviously come back to that discussion. Next slide, please, Alicia. And again, I'll quickly show all of these if I'm doing it now. So we've been focused on essentially laying down sandbags where there is receptivity, where we and our community partners agree that it makes sense. And very quickly then, next slide, please. Just a couple of examples. I long fretted that No Child Left Behind was essentially leaving all of the children on their behinds as schools jettisoned phys ed and recess, and kids went through the school day with no physical activity. And we thought that problem could be addressed by reconciling the square peg to the round hole. So we developed a program called Activity Burst in the Classroom, or ABC for fitness. Next slide, please. And the idea was to empower teachers to dole out physical activity 3 minutes at a time, 5 minutes at a time, any which way they like, and actually to do it right in the classroom throughout the day when the kids needed some kind of break, and then to aggregate the 30 minutes a day. Next slide, please. And we tested this in a randomized intervention of roughly 1,000 kids in Independence, Missouri School District. Half got ABC for fitness, half got business as usual. We published a number of other papers on the topic, but this was the first. And in brief, we saw significant improvements in key measures of fitness, stable performance on all standardized tests, marked improvement in the behavioral environment in the classroom. Fewer kids got in trouble or sent from the room. And, by the way, a significant reduction in all medication use and a significant reduction specifically in medication use for asthma. We also, so that was a surprise, but a happy one, we also saw a 30% reduction in medication use for ADHD. And that has led to a rant I have proudly proclaimed ever since. The proper remedy for rambunctiousness in children is recess, damn it, not Ritalin. And we think with the right kind of physical activity program, we can do this. The other thing that this suggests that I think is very germane to today's discussion is that this is not a zero-sum game. It's not as if health promotion programming needs to come at the expense of reading, writing, arithmetic. We gave teachers more receptive students. We gave them better learners. And I think good wellness programming that's put together with community partners, with the teachers, with the schools, can work just that way. Everybody wins. Next slide, please. I'll only take another couple more minutes. And thank you all for your indulgence. This is part of a bigger picture. The CDC has analyzed the impact of physical activity programming in schools. And really, we ought to be thinking reading, writing, arithmetic, and recess every time, because it's pretty clear that good physical activity programming during the school day leads to better learners and, at worst, stable performance on standardized tests, generally stable or improved, and almost never declines. So, again, we are the teachers' partners. We're giving them a more receptive classroom, better behavioral environment. We're promoting health of body and mind alike, I think, and I think that's a sellable proposition. Next slide, please, Alicia. And then working on the nutrition side quickly, we thought, in terms of a sandbag, what's one thing that we can do that might be helpful? We thought, every kid, like every parent, has heard that fruits and vegetables are good for them. Telling them again or teaching them about fiber isn't likely to change behavior. we went after something we deem very actionable, and that is everybody makes choices when buying a bread or pasta sauce or salad dressing or crackers or cookies or chips or something to drink. And most people are food label illiterate. They have absolutely no idea which is the better choice. So we developed the concept of food label literacy, developed initially a PowerPoint program and then subsequently an interactive DVD. The program is Nutrition Detectives. We have given out 50,000 of these DVDs for free. And by the way, the ABC for Fitness program is free as well. We've given out 50,000. The program is active all around the world, reaching millions of kids. So it's a sandbag in the levee, and this is part of our implementation here in Connecticut as well. Next slide, please. And here we did a randomized trial of 1,200 students, but 1,200 students and their parents. And this is the beauty of this program. So we tested food label literacy before and after in the kids and saw a significant improvement in the food label literacy of the third graders that got the Nutrition Detectives program, which, by the way, takes 90 minutes out of an entire school year, so every school can do this. It's a sandbag. We're not asking them to make room for anything very big. And no change in the control group. But, big deal. You taught kids and they learned. That's supposed to happen. It's no big surprise. The beauty of the program is we tested food label literacy before and after in the parents of the kids who got the program. We never talked to the parents, but there was a significant improvement in the food label literacy of the parents of the kids who got this program in school. Effectively, we turned the little Dickens into vectors. They brought the knowledge home and infected their parents with it. And I think if we think in terms of streamlined interventions that can be paid forward, there's that kind of opportunity. Next slide, please. Just quickly to mention that in the process of developing and disseminating this program, we had to invent the instrument for assessing food label literacy. We call it the FLANK, the Food Label Literacy Assessment and Nutrition Knowledge, Assessment of Nutrition Knowledge, something like that. In any event, the FLANK is now a validated questionnaire for assessing food label literacy, and it's also freely available, and we've had many requests to use that over the years. And I think, Alicia, that's my final slide. And so just and we were trying to reach slightly older kids. We haven't made as much progress with this, and we haven't tested its effects, but we developed a music video series called Unjunk Yourself to try and reach the middle school audience. So we again, always looking for another opportunity to add a sandbag to that levee. There are lots of challenges and limitations I'd like to talk about. I also think we need a moment in our culture of outrage about peddling junk food to kids as we wring our hands about the rates of childhood obesity and diabetes. Maybe it's rather like what's happening now in the aftermath of the tragedy in Florida. We kind of need some righteous indignation and to reorient our culture. We're trying to fix this one setting at a time while America runs on Dunkin' and multicolored marshmallows are part of a complete breakfast. So we've got, if you will, bigger fish to fry. But we've had some pretty good traction, and I'll be happy to get further into the details as we progress. And you've been very indulgent. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. This sounds very fascinating, and I'm certainly looking forward to our upcoming discussion. And last but not least, I'll now turn to Dr. Silva for you to introduce yourself and share a little bit about your expertise as well.
Sure, thanks. So my name is Sarah Sleva, and I'm a health scientist in CDC's Healthy School Branch in the Division of Population Health. I'm excited to be here, and I think the sequence works great because David's comments really set me up nicely. So David had mentioned the IOM report, and it's the Accelerating Progress in Obesity Prevention report. Some of you on the phone may be familiar with this lovely graphic, but essentially it's highlighting the different settings in which we should all be working together to help influence settings to reduce rates of childhood obesity. And I know different presenters and different people on the phone are working in different settings highlighted in this graphic. And what I'll be trying to do with my quick remarks is talk about some of the work that we're doing to strengthen schools as the heart of health. And so there's been a lot of attention paid to the school setting, which means that there's been the good fortune of there being a lot of research and interventions designed to address childhood obesity in schools. And in the last few years, there have been a couple of systematic reviews that work to sift through that evidence to try to figure out what's been working and what's working better. And from that, we've seen that comprehensive approaches tend to be most effective at reducing rates of childhood obesity. And that's really seen more in the elementary and somewhat in the middle school settings. We know a lot less about what works at the high school level, and that's largely because fewer interventions have been designed and tested for that age group. So when I say comprehensive multi-component approach, what I mean by that is that those reviews have shown that it tends to work best if you're addressing physical education and physical activity and nutrition, so both pieces of that. But also the interventions that tend to do better are taking it a step beyond and also thinking about reaching beyond the school day to engage parents and families and thinking about extensions to community connections, whether that's reaching out to local pediatricians, whether that's engaging before and after school programs, just to help there be that surround sound so the messages children are receiving in schools are echoed in home environments and where they go before and after school. I want to emphasize that when I say a comprehensive approach, we're talking about this in the context of obesity prevention, but when you're a child going to one of the schools that's doing this, these comprehensive approaches aren't emphasizing physical appearance. They're not emphasizing weight. The vision is that all children can benefit from having opportunities to move more, from having healthy foods be widely available. It's really the idea is from having basic access to health services. The idea is that's just what school is, and that's the vision we're trying to work towards. I know we're many steps away from that, but that's where we're trying to go. And some of the things we're trying to do to that extent is for the last 5 years, we've been funding all 50 state health departments in D.C. to implement professional development and technical assistance around basic nutrition strategies and also physical activity and physical education in the school day. And on top of that kind of professional development and training approach, we've funded 32 states to do additional work around implementing a comprehensive school-based physical activity program, or what we call a CSPAP. And 19 states have received funding to work on managing childhood chronic conditions in schools, which is a newer area for us, so we've really learned a lot from our grantees there. And so what I'm going to do now is talk a little bit about two resources that we have available. On the left of the slide is our CDC School Health Guidelines, and those are evidence-based guidelines and strategies for putting one of those multi-component approaches into place, and it outlines different evidence-based strategies. And on the right is the whole school, whole community, whole child model. And this is one thing that we really are excited about, the framework for thinking about the different connections between health and academics and health and academic achievement. And so what it does is it combines the whole child model that has had a lot of traction within the education sector for a long time with what many of you may be familiar with as the former coordinated school health model. So putting them together, and it really illustrates how health and academic achievement together support children. So at the very center of the model is a child, and that child is surrounded by the whole child tenets, which are a little hard to read, but it says healthy, safe, I have to squint now, engaged, supported, and challenged. And then you zoom out a layer, and it's a different different strategies that schools can take. You know, what does a school need to do to make sure that a child is healthy and safe and supported and engaged? And we encourage schools and teams that work with schools to apply this framework to guide their efforts to preventing obesity in schools, and also to identifying who else they might need to partner with. So some of the components that might be especially relevant are physical education and physical activity, nutrition, environment, and services, health education, the social emotional climate. That's an area I know has been getting a lot more attention again recently. School health services, counseling, psychological, and social services. We have both family and community engagement. There's a physical environment, so thinking about the building itself, the school grounds. How does the playground layout and the cafeteria promote physical activity and healthy eating? And then in the yellow right around the model, the community wraps around it, so reinforcing the idea that schools are a part of a broader community, and that in turn also influences children's well-being. And so addressing these areas can help children achieve and maintain a healthy weight and attitude about weight. Thanks.
Great. These introductions and some background for our audience today were amazing. So I am really excited to get down into the conversation. So I will jump right into some questions. We received a number of them actually from everyone who registered, and we really, really appreciate you all thinking thoughtfully about what you wanted to hear from the discussion today. And we actually categorized the questions that were submitted, and we created a question guide to really capture some of the key points that you were looking to learn. and that'll help inform the discussion for today. So we encourage you to type any other specific questions that maybe we didn't get to at the level that you were expecting directly right into the chat box. And certainly if we have time, we will point to some of those questions to our speakers. So to get us started, I want to ask everyone, and Sarah, I'll start with you, for you all to define multi-component interventions and what are some of the critical components for successful outcomes?
So thanks, Lisa. I think maybe since I just talked about in my opening remarks what we think about multi-components within CDC Healthy Schools approach, I'm happy to let the other panelists take that on in more detail.
Sure. So who else would like to jump in here and talk about some multi-component interventions and some critical components for a successful outcome?
Alicia, this is Leslie. I'll go ahead and give it a start. I think Sarah's slide is perfect in the sense that it talks about all of the different potential contexts. Individuals don't develop or do any behaviors in a vacuum. We're influenced by others and influence others in return, as Dr. Katz mentioned. But I think the fact that you have resources surrounding not only the school but in the communities and the social service aspect, I would like to emphasize a little bit on that graph that Sarah showed, because we can develop programs with nutrition and physical activity, which we're doing in West Virginia many times, and also emphasizing things like stress and the larger home environment. But if we don't have transportation to those opportunities, or their basic needs are not met, utilities or food insecurity or things like that, then we kind of go back to square one. So those are essential piece that kind of follows that accountable, healthy community, or the community's responsibility. And within that, if those are met, I think the program can kind of fuel the community to get started on those pieces. So I just wanted to emphasize things that were already shown in the slide, but are key, particularly in rural areas, I would argue.
Yeah, thank you for that. The focus on social determinants of health, super important, so I appreciate those comments. Would anyone like to add anything else?
Sure. This is Rahul Gupta, and I think it's important, as my panelists have mentioned, that when we start to look at the social determinants, we need to really look at all the way from birth. So it really starts right at the birth. And one of the things we've done is create family-friendly hospitals. So we're trying to increase not only the baby-friendly designations to hospitals, but also then increase the rates of breastfeeding. And those are the sort of components that we really have to look at this issue as from some ways to say cradle to grave, but on the other hand, we really have to begin where it begins, where life begins. And I think that's the part that we're taking into, and then moving on to early childhood, because in West Virginia, we're working with our academic partners in West Virginia University and a number of other stakeholders to make sure that we have a focus in early childhood education on the social, emotional, intellectual, and physical development and the health of children. So those are the components that I think also begin at the very sort of beginning of the childhood that helps when the children are then entering from daycares onto the grade school. And that's where some of the things we've been able to do actually is to then enact the policy systems and environment changes in order to get sort of returns on investment at that point. But that goes back to what Alicia, you mentioned, and that's a sort of social determinants of health approach to ensure that we're looking at every aspect of that child's life in a practical sense, all the way from the birth to going to grade school, which is a long time as well in the life of the child.
Exactly. I agree. So,
I'll move Alicia, I'll chime in here at the end too, if you think this question deserves a little more attention. It's a good leading question. At first, I just wanted to say what fun and what a privilege it is to speak to the 100 of you who are out there and to join with such thoughtful colleagues to do it. So, I agree. I think Sarah's graphics and slides were excellent and set us up very nicely. In a very simplistic framework, we can think of multi-component interventions as what to and how to. And I suppose by way of validating the notion, I can get into the weeds here. I actually was privileged to be a co-author on some of those meta-analyses and systematic reviews of school-based interventions. We did some of the early ones for the Community Guide to Preventive Services. So one of our salient conclusions looking at just nutrition or just physical activity, if we were focused on measurable changes in BMI, for example, we reached the conclusion that you were most likely to see a change in BMI Z-scores if you address everything that matters to energy balance, both sides of the energy balance equation. You've got to change dietary patterns and you've got to change average prevailing physical activity levels. So, again, if we're talking about childhood obesity per se and the sequelae of it, the what to would be the things that impact energy balance and weight, and that would be calories in and calories out. So your first question is, do you just want to focus on nutrition or do you just want to focus on physical activity? Now, frankly, for health, either is good alone, but the weight of evidence pretty clearly indicates that if you want to have any hope of meaningfully impacting BMI Z-scores or any related measure, you have to address both. So that, the first issue with multi-component is the what to. Nutrition or physical activity, both. And by the way, this is assuming that you've already sort of registered all the very good comments before and the idea of thinking about social determinants and all those other important considerations. And then the next issue would be the how to. So, if you want to change physical activity in a child's life, well, you can do it during the school day. You can do it after the school day. You can do it with dedicated sessions of recess and phys ed, or you can have activity bursts throughout the day. And the ideal may be some Chinese menu where any given school district and any given setting has the option of adopting whatever means of producing a minimum of 30 minutes of physical activity a day for every child works best for them. So that becomes the how-to. And this is, of course, where CBPR principles come into it, because we can agree on the what. The what is fairly universal. We want every kid to get at least 30 minutes of physical activity every day, preferably more. How do we make that happen here? Well, the people who own the here, when it's their real estate, they are best suited to make that call. So I think, we as researchers and academics, we can be pretty clear about the what, and we rely on specific community partners to tell us how. And then it may be multi-component. You may have after-school programming. You may have phys ed. You may enhance phys ed with programs like PE for Life and others that increase the value of dedicated doses of physical activity. Or you may adopt a program like Take 10 or ABC for Fitness or others that distribute physical activity throughout the school day. There are incentive programs where you've got kids wearing pedometers and competing against one another, and you can think of all sorts of fun ways to put them against one another, and the steps add up and represent, essentially a journey across the country or across their state, or all sorts of ways to implement and guide people toward the same goal. Nutrition is the same, although more complicated, because kids only do some of their eating in school. With physical activity, you clear a threshold, you're good. At diet, it's not as if, you ate well during school, so it no longer matters what you eat at home. No, we want the improvement in the overall dietary pattern. You're almost obligated then to engage with the parents. So you need to send material home. Do you change the cafeteria? Do you just rearrange things? Now, for those of you in the know in social media, it's an awkward time to mention, but Smarter Classroom Initiative, Brian Wansink, I still believe. So, do you rearrange how you display food? Do you make the better food more readily accessible? All of that. Do you teach food label literacy? Do you teach other things? Do you send material home to try and raise awareness with the parents? Do you try to provide guidance for choosing better items in the supermarket? You direct that to the parents. Do you teach anybody how to cook? We know that's a big part of the formula. And, these are rhetorical questions because, of course, the answer is yes, 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 and yes. But what any given setting can do at any given time is likely to be some portion of this. And what I think we all need to accept when we think about logic models and the nice kinds of frameworks like Sarah showed earlier is that the less we do, the further downstream we're likely to get with our outcome measures. We can maybe change awareness and knowledge and attitudes, but are less likely to change the downstream factors, prevalence of conditions, including obesity. The more we do, the more likely we are to get further downstream. But again, the simple framework that we've used as a lens for multi-component is what and how.
That is a great lead-in to our next question. So can you describe the community-engaged research and how it's led to the development of some innovative interventions and evidence-based programs? And Leslie, I'll actually start with you if you could describe some of that research and work.
Sure. I've had a great opportunity to work with our Community Participation Board here at West Virginia University, and that was actually my first introduction to community-based participatory research. And that experience, I know in general, community involvement can be on a large spectrum, whereby they can have complete involvement in every piece of the research project from design to final dissemination. And then you go to the opposite, where they might be asked in an advisory manner. Where you fall on that spectrum could depend on a lot of other factors. In West Virginia, they are heavily involved in our work. So one example of that would be in terms of the topics that we want to address. They are our representatives from our community. They live in the communities that we hope to improve health within. And so it's very important to get their feedback while providing our research expertise. So in my view, with that being said, I think in my view, having an arrangement, an opportunity to have community members of all ages, particularly those that you're hoping to target with your health programming through the research, at the table to help design and really make sure that you're not going to end up 2 miles off your original anticipated destination in the end is important and valuable. And to have them through that whole process, in my opinion, is also invaluable.
I appreciate.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry,
ahead.
Alicia. I was making sure I answered your question. I guess the only other component that I didn't get to is in terms of evaluation. So with that perception in mind of what community-based research is, part of the evaluation that I don't think is included all the time would be partnership development. So how did our partner networks expand, contrast, focus? How did the skills develop over time? What did we learn from them and vice versa? How was information shared in both directions? Those kinds of things would be additional measures that would be valuable for the process in the next steps that I'm not sure are included, but I wanted to mention. So thank you.
No, I appreciate you adding that. I think that's really important. It takes me to Sarah. I was wondering if you can share how can evidence-based programs then be scaled up. So we talked a little bit about sort of what needs to be there from a research standpoint. So, once those things have been implemented and we've tried them, how can evidence-based programs be scaled up and effective even on a national level for national adoption across states?
Yeah, so I think that's the kind of the big question, right? I think we're actively looking to learn more about the scaling up piece, because I think we've had a lot of smaller scale activities be tested in a research context where you have a team of investigators that have a high touch, high dose intervention that gets rigorously evaluated, and then we kind of are able to extract, what are the components that seem to be working the best. And then we're tasked with, okay, well, how do we make that work on a much leaner budget with in a different setting? So I think I'd mentioned earlier some of the funding we've been providing to our to states across the country to provide professional development and technical assistance on the types of strategies that we've known have proven to be effective. And we're looking forward to looking through the evaluation results. We're in year 5 of that project, so hopefully we will learn a little bit more about what seemed to work and what didn't. All of the states developed evaluation plans that report on different facilitators and barriers that help get a little bit more of the implementation context. And I think, one of the things we didn't, I'm talking a little bit around the question because I don't have a concrete answer for you, but I think one of the challenges when you try to go to national is that we haven't seen much progress in national childhood obesity rates. So we see things that work in smaller pockets and smaller populations, but I don't think we know yet what's going to work at the national level. And I think there's a lot of evaluation challenges present just because when you ask people to layer on a lot of different things at the same time and those components all interact with one another, it's really difficult to know what's driving an effect. So we're still looking to learn. I can't wait to share more concretely, what for sure is working nationally in schools. But so far, we don't have the evidence to really support that, even though we do have, a bunch of promising interventions that have proven to be successful in numerous settings.
No, I appreciate that. Any other thoughts from our panelists about that? Ways that evidence-based programs, how they could be scaled up and effective on a national level. Any other thoughts on that before we move forward?
Oh, sorry. Can I add?
I'll jump in. Go ahead, Sarah.
I was just going to say, because I can't believe I didn't think of this, we see that through policy. So, we saw, I think I kept thinking about programs and interventions, but we did see, and I know Dr. Gupta has done some analytic work on this, a lot of states had implemented state competitive food laws, kind of states ahead of the federal government put in requirements for what kinds of standards were needed to be in place for foods that could be sold outside of school meals programs in schools. And those, in several studies, did show in longitudinal data to be associated with reduced BMI. And so scaling that up, we have through the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act, national national nutrition standards for competitive foods in schools. And so I think that's a good example of something that we saw at the state level through policy. Something was tested, something worked, and then we scaled it up. And I know Dr. Gupta through the Choices Project, those competitive food standards are one of the most cost-effective childhood obesity interventions that you can do in a school setting. So I think there are some opportunities and some examples of where states have been leaders and districts have been leaders in implementing policy approaches that have then been scaled up nationally. And school meals regulations are another example of that.
Yes, thank you, Sarah, for adding in that context. And I think I might pivot to Dr. Gupta actually to talk a little bit more about your Choices Project and maybe even emphasize some of the effective school or community-based strategies that have reduced the prevalence of childhood obesity in rural areas.
Certainly, and I'd be happy to do that. One of the things we wanted to look at and we're very interested in, it goes back to a lot of what the panelists are saying, and I think folks out there know is a lot of things work, but we want to know what works better and what's most effective. So the idea was, let's try to find out what does work most effectively. So, and that was a part of the idea in developing this part. So we partnered with the Harvard School of Public Health to really look at the various policies, programs that would improve nutrition and physical activity environments. And we wanted to look at multiple things. So look at obesity and take a virtual population. With that, add those population factors that lead to BMI increased trends, lead to the population growth of, or expansion of obesity. Then also look at the individual factors, such as body growth, such as personal characteristics, like dietary intake and smoking, and then model interventions. That are everywhere from like WIC program to physical activity in schools, expanding school playground access after hours, to things like sugar-sweetened beverage taxes. And then we looked at the outcomes of each and every one of those activities as if we were to do that and invest in every one, where would we get the most return on investment, and which was also very plausible because we, as I like to call it, we didn't want to be on a 100-year plan. We wanted to make sure we can get something done from policy perspective that actually will have a return on investment. So, for example, we found that a 2 cents per ounce sweetened sugar beverage tax would lead for every dollar invested a $544 in return. And this is the kind of data that we took with us, and we're working to turn that into policy, knowing that that's oftentimes challenging. We also found significant savings on Medicaid and revenue savings. So we found that for 2 cents an ounce. Medicaid cost savings for the state of West Virginia spending will be about $1.5 million a year, and cost savings for total spending would be close to $6 million, and overestimated tax revenue would be about $128 million. So a lot of times we're able to use that return on investment mindset to actually sort of progress the idea of social determinants of health and move that further along as just talking about it. So that's it's in the slides, and we can make that certainly available. But that detail of the work that's been done, and initial states to do that was Mississippi, Washington, and West Virginia, and I think we've had some significant results because of that work.
Well, thank you for describing that. I think that's very contextual and appropriate for our conversation. Before I move forward to our next question, I want to make sure if any of the other panelists had anything to add to this part of the discussion before we move forward. Okay. Well, I'll actually move, David, if you could start us out and speak to this. If you can describe any research linking adverse childhood experiences and or social emotional learning to obesity prevention.
You know, I don't know that I'm best qualified to address this. I probably had more to say on the prior topic. But here's what I can say. So, you know, I'm now kind of up to my eyeballs in the new discipline of lifestyle medicine. I recently was the president of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. It's really it's a passion play, I think. So we founded the college. It's growing very rapidly here in the States. There are sister organizations all around the world. It's a movement. And now we just have to figure out how best to monetize the revolution. One of the things that has emerged from this passion and dedicated focus on lifestyle interventions, not just to prevent disease, but to treat and reverse disease as well. So, you know, literally the delivery of lifestyle as medicine is the incredibly powerful influence of behavior patterns. And you know, I think it is important, and the panel's doing a beautiful job of conveying this, even causes have causes. So we always need to think about the social determinants of health. It's handy that slide is still sitting there. You know, the choices that people make, which are the things we tend to talk about in clinical practice, are subordinate to the choices people have. And that's all about the social determinants of health. But when we can make good behavioral choices, or conversely we make bad ones, it's very clear that they alter the levers and switches of the epigenome. So, you know, I think if we take the big picture in, we have migrated from the genomic age to the epigenomic age. And in the epigenomic age, DNA is not destiny, but dinner is. And, you know, there are all sorts of really interesting things to think about here. So consider, for instance, that half of our epigenomic endowment, the settings of those levers and switches, was established in the womb of our maternal grandmother, because the fully formed egg that made us inside the fully formed ovary of our mother formed within the womb of our maternal grandmother. And our maternal grandmother's lifestyle and weight and stresses and such have in fact been mapped to variations in the susceptibility to insulin resistance diabetes. Now we're talking about an effect that traverses 2 generations. So the question was about early childhood exposure stresses. We certainly know the first 100 days are crucial. We know that there is maximal brain plasticity very early in life. There's the seminal work of people like Fraser Mustard and others who, you know, really looked at, if you're going to invest in human potential, invest in the first 100 days, invest in the first 1,000 days, but invest early. But in fact, we can think even in terms of primordial influences that translate across generations. So we should be thinking about promoting the health of people who are going to have children who are going to have children. If we want to completely remediate the adverse effects of psychological stress and other forms of trauma, because, you know, this isn't quite Lamarck, and it's interesting, we can go all the way back to the historical debate between Darwin and Lamarck, and we know that Darwin won. And yet Lamarck is kind of back a little bit with the epigenome, because actually lifetime experience is being translated genetically across the generations, not in the actual genes we have, but in the settings of the epigenome, which influence what those genes are doing. So, again, I think, Alicia, others may have more to say here, and, certainly there are experts in neonatology and developmental psychology who are very well versed in this, but I think what we're all learning is, first of all, powerful influences early in life, and we can even map them to gene expression, but powerful influences even before life gets started that actually endow each of us with certain predispositions. So, we may, because of our grandmother's stress, may be predisposed to insulin resistance, that sort of thing. And, in some ways it's a profound responsibility as we think about transmitting, a certain predisposition to be healthy or otherwise across generations. It's also an incredible opportunity.
Thank you for those remarks. Would anyone else like to add to that?
I'll just quickly mention that colleagues of mine in the Division of Nutrition and Physical Activity and Obesity have been doing some interesting work with MEND, which is the mind, body, and also emotional intervention. I'm forgetting the acronym. I'm bad with acronyms, but the intervention is called MEND, and it's not school-based. It's more a family clinical linkage program that I think some of you on the call, if this is an area you're really passionate about, might be interested in learning more about. So just wanting to put that out there. If any of you are starting to feel overwhelmed by all these different factors that you need to consider and what can you do about them, that's one intervention that's been getting a lot of attention, just to offer a applied response. Thanks.
Thank you for sharing that. And Leslie, you had something to add?
Well, I just wanted to, thank you, Alicia. I just wanted to go back to a little bit of our earlier discussion and pretty much put this as one of those initial factors that really you can't move forward with potentially physical activity and nutrition effects with your program without paying attention to this and addressing these issues in some way. So I think it's very pivotal. If it's present, it can completely, it's a basic necessity, and if those aren't being met and stress and other outcomes are coming from that, then you're not going to get very far with purely focusing on physical activity and nutrition because they are definitely linked. And I know that someone's mentioned in the comments about ACEs efforts. I know in West Virginia we're looking closely at that, particularly in Kanawha County, our capital, but considering the impact of trauma and in various forms on outcomes, whether it's obesity or anything else that we might be looking at, and again, as an essential kind of criteria.
And I think it goes back to earlier questions around the importance of partnerships, because I think, does this mean that you now need to become an expert in trauma? I think we need to increase our awareness of these factors, but I think it really speaks to the need to developing tailored partnerships. So I presented earlier that whole school, whole community, whole child model, and I think, I'm on a team of 7 scientists. We're a small team, even though we're at the national level, so I think we're always thinking about who else do we need to be working with, and this conversation, we get those same questions all the time. We hear that a lot from schools because it's exactly as Leslie said, if children are coming to school really hungry, if children are coming to school having experienced violence, they're not ready to learn. So we think about the WISC as those 10 components, the blue ones, as kind of helping us identify, what are non-academic barriers to learning that need to be addressed, because if you think about, we know education is a really important social determinant of health, and there's a lot that influences children's ability to learn. And so I think I just want to put back that there's really a huge partnership emphasis piece in terms of thinking who else do we need to bring to the table and to our conversation to move forward with our work.
Thank you. So we have had quite the discussion already, really talking about linking policy to practice. Research to policy to practice. And now I want us to move forward and have some discussion around partnering with prevention, research centers, education, and the local stakeholders, so more grassroots level. So in relation to partnerships, what are some best practices for engaging educational, community, and non-traditional partners? And I welcome you all to share any examples specifically that you have around that question.
This is Raul Gupta. I can certainly I'll be happy to start out. I think the main reason we're gathered today is actually about partnership, because that's the way we're going to solve some of these, tremendous contemporary challenges. We work very closely with our colleague, with Dr. Cottrell Leslie's group at Prevention Research Center. She's mentioned the Community Partnership Board, which is a very important piece of the PRCs, because it allows both practitioners as well as scientists to come together and sort of understand the community's needs at the community level, so that we're meeting people where they are. I think for areas, whether it's tobacco, whether it's a sedentary lifestyle, nutrition, having those partners, both traditional partners that we often think about in terms of academia and policy, as well as non-traditional partners, I think are key to making sure that we're able to do that. One of the things we've done recently in West Virginia is to create a state obesity plan, one of the first ones ever, to have a 5-year plan, very specific outcomes in terms of nutrition, physical activity, but ultimately what are those steps, and then add not only the rigor of scientific community, but also then on the flip side of this, make sure that we have the grassroots. So there's a program called Try This West Virginia, that what we do is do mini grants, so we can give a few $100,000 that turns out to be much more money, because it's matched by community partners and community resources. So they're working at a number of evidence-based strategies, from farm to table to growing food, to getting in schools, and farmer markets and other things. So there's an involvement where several hundred sort of organizations and individuals become part of this, so it's become a grassroots movement. One of the things that's also done as a result of that, have something called the West Virginia Fed Up. This is a counter advertising campaign to really have the youth come out and talk about the importance of the counter advertising to the whether it's the chain restaurants and others. So having the youth have a voice as in those partnerships at a very grassroots level, and then that moves up through the partnership with PRC to all the way up to the scientific level. I think it provides a completely full circle where we can get both, again, policy systems change, as well as environments that kind of leads to that social determinants of health mindset.
And Alicia, I would just add, continue with the West Virginia theme. I think beyond that, rural communities pretty much realize if you live in a rural setting, you figure out that you cannot move forward by having a specific categorization of partnerships, right? You can have your school partners. If you start going down that road, you miss a lot of partners that could potentially help you get it done, just because you're going through some classification. So, and because I mentioned rural is because we don't have a lot of resources to begin with, so we ask everyone. And that turns out to be fantastic, because someone might have the room that you need to establish your program, or to establish a garden, and you would have never thought about that. You never would have asked them. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a nonprofit. It could be someone who owns a building down the street who just is willing to give it. So that would be my one recommendation, is don't go in with a structured approach for partnership building.
And I think I'd just add, I know a lot of us on the phone come from a health background, and I think to do this type of work, we'll probably need to engage a lot of people who don't share that lens. And so I think there's a step, too, of just working to understand what matters to your potential partners. So can you show up at one of their meetings and just listen to how they talk about issues? What language do they use, and what are they getting excited about? Because it might be different from the language you use, but you might be talking about the same things. And so just as an example, for us, we work a lot with educational partners, and so we know that through the Every Student Succeeds Act, states have had to choose a voluntary indicator that they're going to report on, and many states have elected to report on chronic absenteeism. So one thing that we're doing is we're trying to think about how do the issues that we talk about in our day-to-day, how does school management of chronic conditions, how does physical activity, how does nutrition tie into school attendance rates, because that's going to resonate with partners that we need to work with. And I just wanted to share that in the resource slides, I've flagged a couple of partnership guides that I quite like. One is, they're both by NACDDs. One is about Department of Health and Education partnerships, and the other one is about partnerships between schools and hospitals, which I think may be useful to some of you on the call.
Thank you for sharing those resources. Those are certainly helpful. David, I want to turn to you because you mentioned this a little bit earlier, but what are some other ways, or if you want to expand on what you shared earlier, to empower communities and parents to be advocates to healthy eating and physical activity for children? So speaking up for those things and how they can play a more active role in advocating for that.
Okay, advocacy. And if you don't mind, Alicia, I'll append to this issue of novel partnerships. So if I may, quickly, two resources available to all of you. I mentioned this earlier, but thinking about the challenge of doing good evaluation, and, obviously to prove that we've made a difference, we need to measure it. We all appreciate that. But, the issue of robust evaluation and CBPR can at times seem to be in conflict. To get really robust evaluation, frankly, the researchers kind of need to be in charge. What are the outcome measures? How do we measure them? And this is difficult because you go into schools and there are things you want to measure that the schools, for example, may have issues about measuring, height and weight among them. But, almost any measure you can think of is an inconvenience for the school day, and so there's a tension there. So wrestling with that issue and how we can scale up CBPR, working with Larry Green and others, we wrote a paper, and again, I mentioned it earlier, I just wanted to give you the reference. So I'm the first author, American Journal of Public Health, 2011, From Controlled Trial to Community Adoption, the Multi-Site Translational Community Trial. And I will let me just copy that title and put it in the text box here so everybody has it. But, you just find that in PubMed. And that may be a useful resource because we thought about how do you engineer this balance between robust evaluation and allowing the community to introduce hypervariability in the how-to component. So we kind of stipulate the what-to, the community owns the how-to, and it's a robust partnership and offers opportunities for scale. The other resource I want to mention directly related to this issue of advocacy, essentially is directing people to reliable and trustworthy information. This is a tremendous challenge for us in this age of fake news, and frankly, we've had fake health news for maybe longer than we've had fake news about just about anything. Certainly the world of nutrition invites fake news and alternative truths all the time. And so people are confused, and, they're subject to media confusion, disagreement among scientists, to say nothing of marketing influences. So, I think we need to rally around common truths, and I'd like to commend to everyone, and forgive me if I appear to be representing things I'm involved in, but those are the things I know best. But, there's nothing in this for me. But we have a global nonprofit that sort of spun off the American College of Lifestyle Medicine and the PRC at Yale, the True Health Initiative. And the council of directors there is more than 400 really world-class experts in public health and related disciplines from 40 countries. And we have a monthly newsletter, and we rebut the misleading headlines about lifestyle and diet and so forth. So this is a resource, and, I think it's an invitation for people to come together in a community engaged in the pursuit of honest information about how do we empower ourselves, what could it mean for us and the people that we love. So, I think the first thing we need to do if we want people to rally around the journey to True North is to make sure they know where there is. You think about what got us to the moon and footprints and a flag up there. There were three components as far as I can tell. One was we wanted to go. Two is we are an ingenious and relentless species. And three is we knew where to find the damn thing. Well, frankly, I think we'd all like to go to a world where 80% of chronic disease and premature death goes away. I think we're still ingenious and relentless, but we bicker and argue about where there is. I think that's crucial. I think if we can get people to agree, hey, the prize here is more years in life, more life in years, and we all agree on the fundamentals of where there is and how to get there, well, then all of a sudden, absolutely, we're pretty passionate about it because we've got skin in the game, the skin of our children, for example. So, I think, frankly, the pseudo-confusion about, the clarity of this opportunity is the single greatest impediment to engagement and advocacy. If we can get parents to understand you have the capacity to bequeath to the children you love a better life, a longer, more vital life. I mean, all the things you want them to have, you have a significant role to play, and making health a family value every which way you can is a huge part of that. And so, we want to help get good information to you directly, get it to you via your kids. And by the way, Alicia, we've seen this work both ways. We get the kids with some of our programming really stirred up about health, and they become the agent of change. It isn't always how do you engage parents to advocate for the health of the kids. Sometimes you get kids really stirred up, and again, we're seeing this in older kids now in Florida, where they take on a crucial social cause, and they are potent agents of change. And everybody thinks, my goodness, young people are passionate about this. We've got to pay attention. So, I think we should not underestimate the opportunity for the kids themselves to be the tip of the spear, and if we can get them passionate about the cause of health. And we can even ask of them, I think, some element of responsibility. I don't think we routinely tell kids, look, your willingness to pursue healthy living will influence the health of the people you love most in the world, your parents. If you are trying to help them learn more about being active and eating well, you can help them be healthy and have a better life. And we've seen incredible responses to that. So all of those things. And I had a story to tell about novel partnerships with supermarkets, but I'll stop talking, and if we circle back to it, fine. And if not, folks on the line probably can figure out how to find me.
Thank you for those remarks. And I echo that. I think we've seen a lot where kids step up to the plate and become really great advocates for their community. Several examples come to mind for me just from tobacco prevention and those types of efforts. So I certainly agree with your sentiments there. In talking more about the influence of partnerships and thinking about public health organizations and more coordinated efforts among different correlated conditions that include things like obesity prevention, diabetes, and oral health. What are some examples or recommendations that you all might have for public health organizations to coordinate those efforts more? And I would look to maybe Dr. Gupta or Sarah to maybe get that conversation started for us.
I can certainly start out. In West Virginia, we're using a multifaceted approach, including requirements for dental sealants, for example, for kids, both at school entry as well as in third grade and seventh grade and soon to be 12th grade as a requirement, and then have more initiatives that are policy implementation that are helping kids stay healthy. The same is true for nutrition standards in schools and early child education centers. One of the things we've done is created the school standards for both physical activity of certain minutes a day for all of the over 500 schools that have adopted that, as well as the fruits and vegetables requirements. So some of those policies, working with the Department of Education at the state level, has been very fruitful in developing those large level policy guidelines. As I mentioned, a while back we were able to also go to the legislature and get the liability challenge or liability concerns removed by making sure that the school facilities could be utilized after hours by community members. That was important for us. We also wanted to make sure that now we have faith-based sort of establishments that are having policies around healthy meals and snack policies. Those are something else that we're having. We're also working with our community partners to implement a complete streets policy. So I think part of this is whether we're working with the business community, education partners, community level partners, or state level partners, it's important for us has been to make sure that we not only work through evidence-based, but also emulate the successes we have. So when I mentioned Fed Up, counter-advertising program was based on the success of tobacco raise program that the youth took part in. So I do agree with David a lot that we do have to be able to recognize and utilize our youth to be the change that we seek actually to happen in our communities. And it is those kinds of changes that we're working in. And it's important to also understand from a multi-component perspective that we also have to look at the environment. We have to make sure that there's looking at addressing access to clean water, not just healthy foods and physical activity, but other opportunities, clean air. So these things are, as we've discussed today and we're discussing, interlinked in terms of those social determinants of health. And I think it's important for as these the youth, the children, start to sort of take a leadership role, we can't miss any opportunity to making, again, healthy choice the easy choice, whether it's the ability to buy a salad over a bag of chips, or having that safe neighborhoods to be able to have physical activity. And it may sometimes take a simple thing as putting lighting in the streets. But those are the environmental sides as well as behavioral sides I think we need to address in a comprehensive manner, so to be able to not just take one component, but make sure that when we are talking about, as we have today, that kids understand and their parents understand what it's like to be healthy. We're looking at the full health and full, complete individual as a child.
Thank you. I appreciate those comments. Sarah, anything to add?
I think just from our work funding different states over the past 5 years, we've seen some interesting examples of work being done to coordinate. I mentioned earlier that we've been funding a smaller group of 19 states to implement strategies around school-based management of chronic conditions, and I think for us, our two newest areas in our portfolio are doing more on school-based management of chronic conditions and doing more with out-of-school time, both because those are two areas that have a lot of potential to help advance health equities, because for families that may not have a consistent medical home, having a point of contact with a school nurse who can play a role in identifying, tracking, and referring, it can be a huge lift. I think, unfortunately, it's only about half of schools in the U.S. that have access to a full-time school nurse. So I think we've been learning a lot from other partners around, what are other resources available to kind of help boost what's happening with school health services. And I wanted to draw attention to one being the American Academy of Pediatrics Teams project. I think I have a slide in the resources that just provides some more information about their HAS assessment, which is a tool that school nurses can use to really better map out, what are services that are already in place in the school, what's missing, and what partnerships might be necessary to help do more. I mentioned that guide for school-hospital partnerships. And then we've seen some innovative examples of states leveraging their state employee plans to do more around school employee wellness, knowing that a lot of school staff are state employee staff. I know Leslie, West Virginia has done some exciting work in this area, and I believe North Carolina and Tennessee have as well. I think one of the challenges with being creative with what happens with your state insurance plans is that kind of assumes that certain funding exists for prevention activities, but there have been some really exciting work happening in those states around linking programming to support employee wellness in school settings. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to add to that? Any experience that you all have had coordinating across partners, sort of rallying around some co-related conditions that create challenges across multiple different diseases?
I know I can give one example that's in our current applied research for the PRC, which is our partnership with the local state health department in the region that we're focused on. So there they have an established model of community health workers. And so for our program, we have two intervention arms, which one's in the school setting and one's in the home setting. And so the local health department had a team of AmeriCorps workers who were serving on other projects for diabetes, for adult obesity in the area. And the same group was trained and has partnered with us to provide the home setting intervention of our program. So that's been a very new approach for us as a PRC in a way of implementing something that arguably is more sustainable in the end, if the home, particularly intervention, is successful. They're already providing obesity and related programming to adults and potentially some of the parents in the area, and it worked out nicely.
Thank you for adding in that example. I'll move us now, actually. I want to take a few minutes to address any additional questions that the participants may have today that maybe we didn't cover in this very comprehensive discussion already. So I invite those of you who are listening in on the phone to please type in any additional questions you have in the chat box. And while you do that, I'd like to actually address one question to all the panelists. Are there best practices for coordinating interventions that include both policy, that include all policy systems and environmental change? And if there are, which I think we've alluded to that in our conversation today, any of those in particular you'd like to point out for the folks listening in today before we wrap up this afternoon? And,
Alicia, I'd be happy to.
Yeah.
Happy to point out my favorite, and you know, frankly, we I think have all seen the examples in the literature of well-coordinated efforts that have not been very successful. Perhaps, you know, one of the best in the realm of childhood obesity is Shape Up Somerville, Christina Economos out of Tufts, where the quintessential multi-component intervention, engaging the entire community, schools kind of at the epicenter, but, you know, really working with businesses and the clinical community and so forth, really did bend the curve for the city of Somerville. It's both an encouraging tale and something of a precautionary one because it indicates how much work, how much money, how much time and effort is required to bend the curve when it's bending, you know, essentially against the prevailing winds of our culture, which again runs on Dunkin' and peddles multicolored marshmallows as part of the complete breakfast. But Dr. Economos and her colleagues achieved success there. But frankly, my favorite example, and if we all want to look to the most luminous example of what a coordinated community-wide effort can do, it's North Karelia, Finland. It's the North Karelia Project. So, you know, whereas in this country we took the teachings and you know, the great science really of Ansel Keys, the 7-country study, and converted it into Snackwell cookies, in North Karelia, Finland, Pekka Pushka and others took the learnings of Keys and his colleagues, applied them with fidelity, and, you know, essentially shifted dietary patterns away from animal food centrism to more plant food intake, vegetables, fruits, vegetable oils, nuts, seeds, beans, lentils, reduced smoking, reduced sodium, reduced saturated fat, increased physical activity. And they did this by focusing on every aspect of the community, business leaders, governmental leaders, all willing, you know, essentially to work closely with premier epidemiologists. The project is now run by Erkki Vartiainen. And, you know, of course, there are innumerable peer-reviewed publications issuing from the North Karelia Project, but over half a century, they have observed an 82% decline in age-adjusted mortality from cardiovascular disease, which is just stunning. And there have been trends in declining mortality around the world, but they are way out in front of that. And they have observed in North Karelia a 10-year average addition to life expectancy. So those outcomes are more measurable, obviously, in adults. But the adults who are enjoying those benefits today were kids 50 years ago when the project began. So I think, you know, everybody should look to North Karelia for great lessons about community-wide implementation involving practice, programming, and policy.
Thank you. Dr. Gupta?
Yeah, I was going to just mention two things you folks may want to check out. One is we were funding in 2009 for about 4 years from Robert Wood Johnson for a project called Keys for Healthy Kids. Keys number 4, Healthy Kids. It's available online, and actually after the 4 years, we became self-sustaining in this sort of region, and there's a lot of policy systems and environmental changes that are happening as a result of that work. And obviously, it's 9 years later, so it's going on through, there's a sustainability component to it. And the other, I think, the Choices work is quite remarkable. It's one of those that you could do a sort of analysis, get some revenue data and others, and actually be able to model what every one of these policy changes would look like. So I think there's some options. Those two would be the ones I would say that adopt policy and systems change together.
Great, thank you. Sarah?
Sure. I think earlier we mentioned nutrition standards, an example from Dr. Gupta's work, and I think two other kind of really broad policies that are starting to show some evidence is local wellness policy implementation. Schools have been required to have local wellness policies on their books since 2006, but it was an unfunded mandate, and recently there's been more of an emphasis on going from, this piece of paper to something that's implemented and alive in schools. And they're fairly comprehensive policies with some required components, but schools have a fair amount of flexibility in terms of dictating the comprehensiveness and strength of those policies. And we're starting to see some early evidence that schools that are implementing those, and especially the role of school wellness councils, they're starting to see benefits in terms of implementing local wellness policies and student BMI. So it's definitely still early, just a couple of studies. I think now that there's more emphasis placed on the implementation, I think it'll be really interesting to see what happens if we learn more from those efforts. So I just wanted to add that. And in terms of best practices, kind of a nod of encouragement to those of you on the call. I suspect there's a lot of researchers on the call that we really need to learn more about what works well with adolescents. It's an area that there hasn't been as much research focused on, and understandably it's challenging. It's a lot harder to get into high school. There's a lot of competing interests at the age level. But at the same time, we've seen significant increases in the rates of overweight and all categories of obesity among youth 12 to 19 years old. And we know that's a really critical growth period in terms of physical development, in terms of adolescent brain development. These youth are getting ready to make a lot of independent choices. They have disposable income. It's a really important time to try to reach a group of youth. And so for those of you on the call, I just encourage you to try to contribute to the evidence base on what those best practices could be.
Thank you. And Leslie, anything to add?
These are all great examples and great resources. The only thing I would mention is another example if people are looking to see how this might be generated. We've had a policy or a mandate for physical activity in our schools that's unfunded, and so the implementation of that has been, it's varied over the years, but more and more resources have been put into that, the programming has been put into that, the oversight, so that variability becomes a little bit more focused. And so in that scenario, you start with a policy that's unfunded, and you add the practice and the oversight to try to really target and get a broader impact. And we're seeing some great changes across our schools, regardless of resources in that school, the size of the school, the student-teacher ratio. So I think that scenario is also there, as well as the practice to policy.
Thank you for all of those recommendations. And I see in the chat box we're getting several additional resources for folks to go to. So I'll shout out both Laura and Alan in the chat box. Thank you all for sharing those links with everyone today. We are approaching the end of our time, and I didn't get any additional questions. So I think what I'll do is just go down the line. If you all could give me a 30-second takeaway that you would like for all of our participants to sort of leave here with, either some marching orders, action steps, things that they should definitely check out. I'll just go down the line, a 30-second quick sort of recommendation on what should they focus on next as a result of participating in today's Ask the Experts virtual learning session. So David, I'll start with you.
Alicia, would it be easy to pull up the final slide I didn't show? I need 25 seconds to mention that. So we can do better. Let's face it, we really do know how to address childhood obesity. We just need a culture that really cares. So we need to be innovative, and I think we need to start thinking about integration across opportunities. So for 5 years, I was privileged to be the editor-in-chief of the Childhood Obesity Journal, And during that time, I thought of this concept. You know, businesses routinely adopt stretches of interstate, and they get credit for being good corporate citizens, and they get good PR. Why don't they adopt public schools? And if we need to pool their resources, let's use chambers of commerce. Let's have businesses that have skin in the game, because these kids are the financial dependents of the parents who are part of the workforce that they're insuring. Let's have them adopt our public schools, pay for wellness coordinators. They will benefit because these kids won't get type 2 diabetes quite so often, and give us the boots on the ground we need so that we can conjoin worksite wellness efforts with school-based wellness efforts and have the resources. Everything we try to do comes to a screeching halt for the usual reason, money. But I think there are places to go where the financial rewards for promoting the health of children could essentially be addressed by making the investments in the health of children, as opposed to doing what we usually do, which is pleading for nickels and dimes to try and advance this absolutely essential mission. So we can do better. We can find new ways. We can connect the dots. So let's all try.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate adding in some novel ideas to leave with our participants today. Dr. Gupta, your final remarks?
Well, thank you. First of all, I want to thank you, Alicia, and Josh at ASTHO and others for organizing this very important discussion amongst our co-panelists, whom I am also gracious for sharing all the information. I think in my remarks, I would say that I think the relationship of working with your Prevention Research Center, your state and local health department, and with traditional and non-traditional partners, find those maybe not be the same across communities, urban, rural, and inner city, and they may be different. So I think the idea is to be able to have the tools necessary as well as the science behind it to make sure that we have measurable evidence-based programming in communities across the nation that occur that will yield similar results, although they will be different shape and form of those programs. I think if we can marry that and send that message across, that is probably the most valuable lesson for me out of this meeting today. So I want to thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. And Sarah? Sarah, I think you're on mute.
I'm just getting the warning from my computer that is very low on battery, so this timing is great. I think my closing remarks are thank you for inviting me to be a part of this conversation, and to my co-presenters. I think the sad reality is I think we have a lot of work in front of us, and I foresee us being in this situation where we have to do more with less resources. I don't see that changing immediately. This is my personal opinion, but I think what that means is that there's a lot of emphasis on creativity and partnerships and really needing to work together. So I think part of that is really listening to what are other people's priorities and how they align with yours, and encouraging you all to think about, the emotional, physical, and academic development of youth and that total package in childhood obesity prevention efforts. And I just want to quickly nod to two opportunities that may be of interest. One is that later this month, they'll be published in the Childhood Obesity Journal, a whole section of articles that look at stories from the Childhood Obesity Declines Project, which is something colleagues of mine in the Division of Nutrition, Physical Activity, and Obesity have been working on. It's looking at a couple of communities and counties that did report declines in childhood obesity between 2003 and 2011, and looking to see what are commonalities of their experiences and what seems to be working retrospectively. So I think those case studies may be encouraging and of interest to people on the call. And the second one is that through the PRC network, there's the NOPRN researcher group, which I think is a slide on, and people can email me later if they're interested in, but there's a variety of different groups. There's a rural one, there's a water access one, there's a schools one. It's a really great space to just learn more from other researchers about that work. So I think I'll end on that theme of partnership and collaborative learning. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Leslie, your final remarks.
So, again, I appreciate the opportunity to be part of this panel. This has been really fun and educational, so thank you. Slightly different twist, but something that's already been said is that, you don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel, but don't assume the existing wheel will work for everyone. So know your communities, understand them, what they need. It might be slightly different, And I think the comments that people have mentioned about the resources available to get something done to fit that need are slightly reducing, and so to combine and get creative on what resources might get you to the end goal is key for us in the future.
Great. Thank you all so much for joining us. You have been a wonderful panel. I have certainly enjoyed the conversation and learned a lot of new resources that I'm going to have to check out after today's event. I would be remiss not to thank CDC for sponsoring this Ask the Experts virtual event. I invite all of the participants to please fill out the evaluation at the conclusion of today's event. Your remarks are so useful in how we plan for future programs and how we tailor and partner with different folks to bring these conversations to you. Be on the lookout for a blog that will be highlighting the work of Yale Griffin Prevention Research Center on childhood obesity, and also for future Prevention Research Centers Ask the Experts on rural and mental health that were mentioned earlier in the presentation. Thank you all for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we will be sharing the recording and the materials with you all later on via email. Have a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
All later on via email. Have a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
All later on via email. Have a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
All later on via email. Have a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
All later on via email. Have a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
All later on